Scandal, fraud, bribery, scam of the emissions kind. A company who had the #1 brand in the car industry is embroiled in an emissions scandal that has rocked its foundation. In just a little bit, we're going to uncover the scandals, past and present, that has involved VW, the corporation, and whether the government was complicit in their cover-ups. The world's largest car company, the VW Group, profits of over $10 billion per year, is caught cheating.
They did this cheat system whereby it looked very clean in the lab tests, but when he got onto the road, they were much dirtier.
The economic fallout, massive.
The consumer has been harmed for the full purchase price.
With officials in the German government possibly complicit.
Or they are complicit at the highest levels in a massive cover-up that continues today.
When the news hit, it took many by surprise because it involved the biggest car manufacturer in the world, namely VW, and the fraud had taken place for 6 years, affecting over 11 million cars. Now the question is, why did VW feel it had to cheat on its emission for diesel cars? Ironically, VW has had a major push to sell diesel cars in the U.S., backed by a huge marketing campaign, trumpeting its cars' low emissions. From Audi to Bentley to Bugatti. Let's not forget Lamborghini, Porsche, and the good old Beetle. 12 brands in all. These are the cars that Volkswagen produces. The Volkswagen Group, headquartered in Wolfsburg in Germany, one of the world's leading automobile manufacturers, the largest car maker in Europe. It was conceived in the year 1937. A large company, a conglomerate. The stats speak for themselves. It employs almost 600,000 employees worldwide. It produces 41,000 vehicles per day in 118 production plants. In the year 2014, it sold 10.1 million vehicles. In Western Europe, more than 1 in 4 new cars, that's 25.1%, was made by the Volkswagen Group.
We aim to be the most successful, the most fascinating, and the most sustainable automobile manufacturer by 2018.
Those traits is not what describes Volkswagen these days. A company whose revenue totaled 202 billion euros in 2014 and 197 billion euros in 2013, while profit after tax amounted to 11.1 billion euros in 2014 and 9.1 billion euros in 2013, has cheated authorities, the environment, the shareholders, and ultimately the customers.
As the buyers, they found a car that was good on power but also very good on fuel, and so they thought it was clean as well coming out of the tailpipe. The emissions were good. They passed all America's very stringent tests on exhaust emissions, but then it turned out they hadn't passed it.
The group's stated goal was to offer attractive, safe, and environmentally sound vehicles, which can compete in an increasingly tough market and set world standards in their respective class. Yet people are having a hard time believing it. The VW emissions scandal. This is the Volkswagen corporate page for YouTube, and this is their ad. But that's not what draws our attention. It's the description below. Internal investigations at Volkswagen identify irregularities in CO2 levels issued on November 3, 2015. The CO2 values, and therefore the fuel consumption data, published by Volkswagen for some models are incorrectly stated. We are currently reviewing which models are specifically affected. What this means is that VW's emission scandal was so big and wide that it could not even correctly report the depth of the lies and deceit in which it calls irregularities.
The emissions test was so stringent that VW couldn't really pass them without putting a lot of extra cost into the car, and that would make them unappealing to the people they were trying to win over.
First, big firms have always close relations with Western governments. So even when there was a strict regulatory framework, big businesses had the methods and the ways to sidestep these regulatory frameworks. Not always, but in many cases.
Unregelmäßigkeiten bei Dieselmotoren unseres Konzerns widersprechen allem, für was Volkswagen steht. Auch ich habe zum jetzigen Zeitpunkt noch nicht die Antworten auf alle Fragen. Aber wir sind dabei, die Hintergründe schonungslos aufzuklären.
This resignation by the former CEO of Volkswagen was one of the many internal fallouts from the emissions scandal. But what was the scandal exactly? Well, in September, the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, announced that many VW cars being sold in the U.S. had a defeat device, or software in diesel engines, that could detect when they were being tested. And after this detection, it could change the performance accordingly to improve results.
This type of testing, the way it's different than a smog check, is we're collecting everything that comes out of the vehicle. Once they're out on the road, what we found is the vehicles operate differently. So under these test conditions, the vehicles will all perform as designed. But if you take it out on the roadway, the vehicle will perform much differently and produce higher emissions. As we would run a standard test, this vehicle would pass. If we were to take certain other steps that we used in our research, the vehicle could exhibit the behavior that is illegal. This is something that is a deliberate action. We expect to find things that fail. That's part of products, and especially pushing the envelope of clean vehicles in California. But if it's a deliberate action, that's a very serious issue.
They did this cheat system whereby it looked very clean in the lab tests, but when he got onto the road, they were much dirtier. There was a lot more exhaust gas. There's a lot more of what was something we call oxides of nitrogen, NOx, coming out of the exhaust pipe, and they got found out.
Volkswagen illegally programmed the software in 11 million diesel-powered cars to cheat on emissions tests, even though it had been touting the benefits of clean diesel for years. The effect of this cheating was severe. The cars actually produced up to 40 times the legal limit of nitrogen oxides, or NOx, the stuff linked to increased rates of asthma and other respiratory problems. When the news was announced, it wiped out a third off the company's market value. The shockwave of the scandal has slashed VW's market capitalization by about 25 billion euros to 51 billion euros in just 2 days. VW shares have dived between 17% and 20%. It has already issued a warning that it will lower its profit outlook this year. By how much? Now, that's a tricky number to come up with, since this scandal is still in its infancy. Nevertheless, it has sent investors fleeing. U.S. authorities announced this concerned nearly 500,000 vehicles sold in the United States. Further internal investigations have shown that the software concerned is also installed in other diesel vehicles. Anomalies have shown up in around 11 million cars worldwide that are equipped with a specific engine type, added the car manufacturer. VW then proceeded and halted all diesel vehicle sales in the U.S. That could lead to fines amounting to a maximum of more than $18 billion. Authorities from France to South Korea to China also said that they would have their own investigations. This has forced VW to announce that it was setting aside $7.3 billion in provisions to cover the potential costs of the scandal. Even the German Chancellor Angela Merkel came out condemning this act, saying that full transparency to clear up the matter is needed. She said that she hopes the facts will come to light as soon as possible.
Was VW anbelangt, so geht es angesichts der schwierigen Lage jetzt darum, volle Transparenz zu zeigen, den gesamten Vorgang aufzuklären Und der Verkehrsminister ist hier ja auch in engem Kontakt mit dem Unternehmen VW. Und ich hoffe, dass möglichst schnell die Fakten auch auf den Tisch kommen.
The impact on VW consumers has been immense, and this will be one of the monumental challenges that VW will face: how to get back the trust of its hard-earned customers.
If the allegations are true that these engines could not perform as required under the law, only when put into a special mode during a limited time of a test being conducted, you weren't getting what you paid for. And therefore, the allegation will be that the consumer has been harmed for the full purchase price plus the consequential damages associated with that. Whether it's diminution in value, could be the entire purchase price. The impact here is just, massive.
There's going to have to be a buyback campaign, because my concern is if the car is adjusted so that emissions fall into line with the law, and if the performance and the mileage isn't there, it's still not the car they sold us.
What started in the U.S. has spread to a growing number of countries: the UK, Italy, France, South Korea, Canada, and of course Germany have opened investigations. Throughout the world, politicians, regulators, and environmental groups are questioning the legitimacy of VW's emission testing. VW will recall 8.5 million cars in Europe, including 2.4 million in Germany and 1.2 million in the UK, and 500,000 in the United States as a result of the emissions scandal. But you'd be surprised that VW and its officials have been tainted with a murky past, blighted by cover-ups, dodgy deals, and collusion dating back to 1987. It's stuff that is made for Hollywood movies. In fact, there is a Hollywood movie that is going to be made about it.
First of all, I would like to apologize sincerely.
And reality that Volkswagen Group manipulated engine software in our TDI diesel cars.
I apologize on behalf of everyone at Volkswagen. We will fully cooperate with the responsible authorities.
But scandals are nothing new for Volkswagen. In fact, the company has been mired in some major controversies and scandals that makes the emission scandal look like small potatoes.
The problem VW has in Germany is that it is almost too big. It is German industry. It represents what Germany stands for as well. So it has a sort of infallibility. It thinks it can't do any wrong. And time and again, that has been proven not to be the case.
Volkswagen is a somehow curious company. Its specificity lays in that a big part of its stocks are being owned by trade unions. It is the Piech family that controls the company, but a big part of the stocks are being owned by trade unions. This has to do with the Nazi past of the Volkswagen. That is, the Nazis confiscated trade unions funds and put them into Volkswagen.
In all, 30 years of scandal and bribery, prostitutes and sex parties for German MPs, a £500,000 honey trap slush fund to lure union bosses into compromising positions to weaken their power, and £1.2 million to fund sex parties and luxury hotels are just some of the acts that the car maker is guilty of.
There are a few incidents in the past where one that was mentioned was that a slush fund had been put together that seemed to be for the purpose of of bribing union officials to push through more relaxed working regulations, and it seemed like the problem it has is that it breeds a certain arrogance within a company.
The case involving Peter Hartz, the personal director of the car maker at the time, known as the Perks and Prostitution Scandal, involved payments to members of the company's powerful Works Council, who were also entertained on lavish, all-expenses-paid foreign trips, which included sex parties with prostitutes. But what is alarming about this case is that Mr. Hartz was a close friend and advisor to Gerhard Schroeder, the former chancellor, which may indicate that government officials in the highest level of the German government, all the way to the chancellor, may have had prior knowledge of the emission scandal and did nothing about it.
I'm told that this was a decision made in Germany at the corporate level. Is that correct?
First of all, the investigations are ongoing, but this was not a corporate decision from my point of view. To my best knowledge today, the corporation in no board meeting or no supervisory board meeting has authorized this, but this was a couple of software engineers who put this in for whatever reasons, and I would also like to find out, and I fully agree to your other statement.
And this is an oversight hearing, so I assume that you're testifying under oath. Is that correct?
I'm under oath. I understand this, sir.
Okay. So what you're saying is that the president of Volkswagen International did not know about this when it happened?
What I said was, to my understanding, this was not a corporate decision. This was something individuals did.
In every other case since I've been a congressman, when we've had problems with manufacturers, automobile manufacturers, in every case it's been something happened that was really a mistake, an accident, that they just didn't foresee it. That's not the case here.
Yes.
There was a knowingly and willful decision to deceive in one of the most important markets in the world, and that, sir, is just wrong.
And you're trying to, VW is trying to get the United States of America to believe these are a couple of rogue engineers. I categorically reject that. Either your entire organization is incompetent when it comes to trying to come up with intellectual property, and I don't believe that for a second, or they are complicit at the highest levels in a massive cover-up that continues today.
VW is the Lance Armstrong of the industry. These questions go on and reflect the white heat anger that folks have about the deception.
Do you feel like you've been personally deceived now after you found out subsequently that the defeat devices?
Yes. Yes. And
explain that.
Look, I worked 25 years for this company, and beyond my personal objective of dealer profitability, integrity, quality, and not cheating was always for me given for this company. And when I learned this, I'm as touched and moved, as my employees.
I would suggest that you be honest to your shareholders. 6.5 billion euros is off by an order of magnitude. 500,000 vehicles at $40,000 a piece, if you were to buy those back, and I'd suggest you start doing that tomorrow, that's 20 billion there. I would suggest you are off by an order of magnitude, and if you told us today you would set aside 68 billion, I'd say you're probably in the ballpark. 6.8, not even close.
This was an issue that all companies have, particularly in Europe, where you can't push through the policies that you want because you're so beholden to the government. They have a big stake. I mean, in the terms of VW, they actually have a stake in the company. So it's very difficult to push through the business changes that you want to see to make it more productive, to make it more profitable.
This deregulation drive created significant problems that appeared in the beginning of the 2010. Now, Western governments, instead of returning to regulation and re-regulating markets, use the trick. That is, they promoted what is actually a joke, self-regulation. not the state regulating the economy and the private companies, but the private companies creating among themselves codes of ethics and self-regulating them.
When the car maker's former chief executive officer, Martin Winterkorn, resigned to allow a fresh start, he denied any wrongdoing or culpability. The truth on that will come out since there has been a formal investigation into the case by the German public prosecutor.
It happens within all companies. You get to the positions where you're so powerful, you can seemingly do no wrong, which VW seems to be able to do in Europe because its sales are far and away bigger than any other car company if you take all its other brands together. But in the States, it pushed too far, and the German press at the moment are saying that perhaps the Americans are punishing VW for its own arrogance.
And when it appeared this story couldn't get any worse, news emerged that the UK, France, and Germany had lobbied for flawed car emissions tests based on documents. These countries, who publicly called for investigations into the VW emission rigging scandal, had privately fought to keep loopholes in car tests for carbon emissions. Why did Volkswagen cheat on diesel emissions in its TDI cars? That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Why VW would cheat on the diesel emissions? John Volker from Green Car Reports may have the answer. He said the answer comes down to a combination of cost, fuel efficiency, and driving performance. He claims that VW's emissions for its diesel technology put it into a corner after U.S. emissions and corporate fuel efficiency standards were raised sharply in 2009. Additionally, he said that with no major research and development into electric cars or hybrids in the pipeline, VW was forced to rely on its diesel models, which offered better mileage than conventional gasoline engines but could not meet the tougher emission standards without a modification that would have raised their prices already near the upper limit of their market segments.
I was attracted to it because of the environmental aspect of it being clean.
I'm gonna trade my car in. I can't drive like a car that like ruins the environment because it's like 4 times or 10 times the amount that is allowed, so it's really bad.
They had aspirations to sell between Audi and VW 1 million vehicles a year. I don't think that's possible anymore. They still sell more non-diesel cars than they sell diesel cars, but it will severely impact their goal to grow.
You know, they say if it's too good to be true, it can't be true, and that's the case.
There's a saying in the car industry, if you ain't cheating, then you ain't trying. Well, it turns out that VW is not the only one cheating. Other car manufacturers are also guilty of doing the same. Major manufacturers have been busted for using what VW used, defeat devices. And the reason? Economics, or to put it simply, the bottom line. The economics of the auto industry can make it profitable to cheat. Complying with clean air regulations adds thousands of dollars to a vehicle's sticker price, while diminishing the driving performance that customers demand.
Profitability is a big problem in the car industry. It's working on very slim margins, so you have to push through things like you have to change the way the workers go about the business. You can't have business practices that go back to the 1960s or 70s. It doesn't work anymore. And so VW, they bent the rules by trying to push through these new changes.
Over the years, several major auto manufacturers, including GM, Ford, Honda, and of course Volkswagen, have been forced to pay hefty fines and recall vehicles after getting caught using defeat devices. General Motors agreed to spend $45 million as part of a settlement with government regulators over defeat devices that were installed in Cadillacs, which were sold between 1991 and 1995. In 1998, Ford agreed to spend $7.8 million in fines and fixes after defeat devices were installed in about 60,000 of the company's Econoline vans. During the same period, Honda agreed to $267 million in recall costs and fines to settle allegations it disabled a misfire monitoring device on 1.6 million Accords, Civics, Preludes, Odysseys, and Acuras built between 1995 and 1997.
Overhanging the whole industry at present, the question of were others cheating, and if so, and we do know that others were gaming the system, because very clearly a 2013 paper showed that the gap between the real-world tailpipe emissions and test emissions in Europe was increasing in the decade after 2001.
So there you have it. VW is not the only car manufacturer who has cheated customers in their emission tests. But what is profound is that the officials in charge, from the VW group to manufacturers in the U.S. like Ford and GM, they all got off the hook after paying fines, even though in some cases, like the VW group, the government was aware that there was a problem, which makes the government as guilty. I'm Kavitavli, and I'll see you next week.